She didn't even sit down. That's the part that still gets me. 11 days after I buried my husband, Lorraine Mercer stood in my kitchen like she was inspecting a property she'd already decided to buy. The lilies from the funeral were still on the counter. They smelled sweet and rotten at the same time. I hadn't had the strength to throw them out. She set her purse on the table. Slow, deliberate. "We need to discuss the firm," she said. "Not I'm sorry. Not how are you holding up. Just business. My name is Charlotte Mercer, 32 years old. I remember gripping the back of a chair because I thought my knees might actually give out. Andrew had been dead less than 2 weeks. Cardiac arrest. 37 years old. One minute he was arguing about billing software. The next minute he was gone. Lorraine looked around at the kitchen like she was taking inventory. The Mercer name is attached to that firm. She continued, "It was built with family capital. I'll be assuming control effective immediately." I blinked. I swear I thought I misheard her. "You're assuming control," I repeated, because sometimes repeating something makes it less insane. "Yes, the firm, the house, the accounts connected to Andrew." She smoothed her sleeve. Cream silk. Of course. I felt something shift in my chest. Not grief. Something sharper. "And Isla?" I asked. She paused. "Just slightly. Isla can remain with you," she said. "For now. But the Mercer legacy will not be diluted." For a second I couldn't breathe. My daughter was 5 years old. She still slept with Andrew's old college sweatshirt. She still asked when Daddy would pick her up from school. "Diluted," I said. My voice sounded strange. Thin. Lorraine didn't flinch. "You were never part of the bloodline. Charlotte." That's when Colin stepped forward from the hallway. I hadn't even noticed him there. He was holding a folder. He avoided my eyes. "We're preparing paperwork," he muttered. Paperwork. Andrew's cologne still clung to the coat hanging by the door. I caught a faint trace of it when the air shifted. It almost made me dizzy. "You can't just take everything," I said. It came out weaker than I wanted. Lorraine gave me a look I'd seen before at holidays. That tight smile. "I'm not taking anything that wasn't already Mercer property." I laughed. A short, ugly sound. "The mortgage is in Andrew's name. The firm is a limited liability company. There are procedures." "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "Don't embarrass yourself." I hated that word. Sweetheart. She picked up her purse again. "My attorney will be in touch." And just like that, she walked out. Colin followed her without a word. The door clicked shut. The house went quiet. Too quiet. I stood there for a long time staring at the lilies. The smell had turned heavier, almost metallic. I told myself she was bluffing. Grief does weird things to people. Maybe this was just shock talking. Then, 2 days later, a courier knocked on my door with a thick envelope. That's when I realized she hadn't been bluffing at all. The envelope was heavier than it needed to be. Cream paper. My name typed, not handwritten. That somehow made it worse. I opened it standing at the counter. My hands were steady. I don't know why. Petition to contest last will and testament of Andrew Mercer. Then the next line. Petition for declaratory judgment regarding capital equity. And then the part that made my stomach drop. Motion for joint legal custody of Isla Mercer. I read that twice. Joint custody. I called Lorraine before I even finished the second page. She answered on the first ring. "Yes, you filed for custody," I said. "No hello. No pretense. It's a safeguard," she replied. "You're emotional. The firm is unstable. Stability matters. You think I'm unstable? I think you've never run a business worth over $1 million. That's not what this is about. It's exactly what this is about." I could hear Colin in the background, a door shutting, papers moving. "You said Isla could stay with me?" I said for now. For now, I repeated. "She just lost her father, and I lost my son." Lorraine snapped. That was the first crack in her voice. Just a hairline fracture. You don't get to weaponize that. I said, Andrew built something with Mercer Capital. She continued, calmer now. The firm was seeded with $200,000 from me. That constitutes equity. It was a loan. That's your interpretation. I laughed again. I couldn't help it. You're contesting the will and asking for joint custody at the same time. You're trying to corner me. I'm protecting what belongs to this family. I am this family. I said. I was his wife. There was a pause. A cold one. You were, she said carefully. And now you're the variable. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Richard Halstead, late 40s, navy suit, measured voice. She's alleging undue influence, he said, flipping through the petition and claiming her capital contribution created ownership interest. It was a loan. I said again. I sounded like a broken record. Was there a formal promissory note? Yes. Good. He nodded. That helps. And custody, I asked. She's arguing continuity of the Mercer name. I stared at him. Can she take Isla? He met my eyes. Not easily, but she can make it expensive. I drove home in silence. Isla was coloring at the kitchen table when I walked in. Pink crayon pressed too hard into the paper. Grandma said she's going to fix Daddy's office. She told me, fix it. I knelt down beside her. She doesn't get to fix everything, I said quietly. But the next morning, I heard from one of Andrew's associates. Lorraine had already walked into Mercer and Hale. I didn't hear it from Lorraine. I heard it from Denise. She's here, Denise said, voice tight. In the lobby, I asked. In Andrew's office. My stomach dropped. On what authority she showed up with Jonathan Pike? They had a court order. What kind of order? Temporary administrative access? Not ownership. Just access pending probate. That made more sense. It didn't make it better. She told staff there's going to be a leadership transition. Denise continued. Said she's stepping in to stabilize operations. Stabilize, I repeated. She called a meeting in the conference room. Said the Mercer Capital gives her standing. I sat down slowly on Isla's bed. Her stuffed rabbit stared up at me. Did she fire anyone she can't? Denise said quickly. Not directly, but she asked Martin to step aside pending review. That was worse. Who made that call? I asked. Thomas Hale. Denise said. He signed off as managing partner. Said it was temporary until probate clears. Thomas. Andrew's oldest partner. Risk-averse. Always polite. And Colin, I asked. He's there, Denise said. Sitting at the table. Not speaking much. I could picture it. Lorraine composed. Pike calm. Colin trying to look decisive. Later that afternoon, Richard called me from his office. He'd just gotten off with Pike. Let's be precise, Richard said. She does not have operational control. She has access to records and the right to review estate-related interests. She's acting like she owns it. I said. That's strategy, he replied. Perception is power, and Martin Thomas likely agreed to reassign him to avoid conflict. It's internal, not judicial. So Lorraine hadn't stormed in and fired the CFO. She'd applied pressure, and someone else had moved. 2 days later, Thomas called me himself. Colin signed the renewal package, he said quietly. What package? The line of credit modification. It required a personal guarantee. For how much? $480,000. I closed my eyes. Did he understand that there was a lot of discussion about keeping payroll intact? Thomas said carefully, urgency, urgency. Another convenient word. Did anyone suggest waiting for an audit? I asked. Pike did, Thomas admitted. Lorraine declined. Of course she did. That evening, I drove past Mercer and Hale. The lights were on in Andrew's office again. But now I understood something I hadn't before. Lorraine didn't need legal control. She just needed people to believe she had it, and too many of them already did. I waited until after 9. I don't know why I chose that time. Maybe because I knew Lorraine wouldn't be there. Maybe because I was tired of feeling like a guest in my own life. The hallway lights at Mercer and Hale buzzed faintly. The place smelled like printer toner and stale coffee. Andrew's door was locked. I still had a key on my ring. When I stepped inside, I didn't look at his chair first. I looked at his desk. Clean. Too clean. Lorraine must have gone through it already. I opened drawers slowly. Legal pads, old briefs. Nothing personal. The bottom drawer stuck halfway. I had to pull harder than I meant to. That's when I saw it. A manila envelope. My name written in Andrew's handwriting. Just C. My hands went cold. I sat in his chair. I hadn't let myself do that since he died. The leather creaked under me. Inside were 3 things. First, a letter. Charlotte. If you're reading this, it means I ran out of time. I had to stop there. Just breathe. He wrote about Isla, about how she says spaghetti wrong on purpose because she thinks it's funny. He wrote about how I always forget to cancel subscriptions. It was stupid and normal, and it almost broke me. Then the line that made me sit up straighter. My mother counts billings. She never counts risk. I swallowed. Second, beneficiary confirmations. Life insurance policy $1,400,000. Sole beneficiary Charlotte Mercer. Retirement accounts $390,000 in the 401k. $220,000 in a brokerage account transfer on death. All directed to me, not the estate. Me. I actually laughed out loud. It sounded wrong in the empty office. Andrew, I whispered. What were you planning? Then I unfolded the 3rd document. It wasn't printed. It was handwritten. Columns, numbers, notes in the margins. Gross revenue $1,200,000. Net before debt $210,000. Then below that, vendor advances $320,000. Unpaid payroll taxes $118,000. Malpractice settlement signed. Unpaid $275,000. Remaining lease obligation $342,000. Personal line of credit guarantee $480,000. I stared at the page. The firm wasn't a legacy. It was a liability bomb. Andrew had circled the malpractice line twice. Payment due within 60 days of settlement execution. He'd signed it before he died. I leaned back and pressed my hand over my mouth. Lorraine thought she was inheriting prestige. She was inheriting exposure. I pulled out my phone and called Richard Halstead. It was late. He answered on the 3rd ring. Charlotte, I found something. I said, Is this about the estate? It's about the firm. He was quiet. I have documentation of liabilities exceeding $1 million. I continued, most of it personally guaranteed. And the assets, he asked carefully. Non-probate. Beneficiary designations? Clean. I could hear papers shifting on his end. What are you thinking? He asked. I stared at Andrew's signature at the bottom of the page. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that I don't want to fight her. Silence. Explain. Richard said, I want to give her everything. The firm, yes. The house, yes. He paused longer this time, and in exchange I closed my eyes. She drops the will contest, and she withdraws the custody petition. Permanently. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't shaking anymore. Richard's voice came back steady. That's strategic. She wants the Mercer name. I said, let her have it. I folded the papers back into the envelope. Andrew hadn't written a plan. He hadn't needed to. He'd trusted me to see it. When I locked the office door behind me, the hallway felt different, not safer. Just clearer. The next morning, I told Richard to draft the surrender. Richard looked at me like I'd just confessed to arson. You want to surrender, he said slowly. I want to transfer every estate asset. I corrected. The firm, the house, The account's in Andrew's name, and you expect her to accept that without suspicion. She won't be suspicious. I said, she'll be triumphant. Richard leaned back in his chair. You understand this is unconventional. So is suing your son's widow for joint custody 11 days after the funeral. That shut him up for a second. He flipped open his notebook. And your condition. She withdraws the will contest. Permanently. And she files to dismiss the custody petition with prejudice. No visitation claim. No standing later. Richard nodded slowly. Clean break. Yes. And you're sure no. I wasn't sure of anything. But I didn't say that. I'm sure. I said. He made the call that afternoon. Jonathan Pike answered. Charlotte Mercer is prepared to settle, Richard said evenly. There was a long pause on the other end. On what terms, Pike asked. She will relinquish all estate claims to the firm, the residence, and associated accounts, even through the speakerphone. I heard Pike inhale sharply. In exchange, Richard continued, Mrs. Mercer will withdraw the custody petition and the will contest. Withdraw, Pike repeated, or dismiss with prejudice with prejudice. Silence again. I will need to advise my client, Pike said carefully. Of course, Richard replied. Later that evening, Lorraine called me directly. What are you doing? She demanded. I'm giving you what you wanted. You're not fighting. No. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to. You're walking away from everything Andrew built. I'm not, I said quietly. I'm choosing differently. She let out a tight breath. You finally understand your position. No, I said. I understand yours. The signing was scheduled for Tuesday morning. The next day, Richard forwarded me a copy of a letter from Jonathan Pike. Formal. 2 pages. He advised Lorraine to delay acceptance pending a forensic audit of liabilities exceeding $1 million. At the bottom, there was a waiver. Lorraine's signature was already there. She was proceeding against counsel's advice. I stared at her signature longer than I should have. That night, I opened a new bank account in my name only. The life insurance claim was still processing. I didn't tell anyone. On Tuesday morning, I put on a navy dress I hadn't worn since Andrew's last firm holiday party, and I drove to sign away the Mercer legacy. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and paper that had sat too long in a copier tray. Beige walls, no windows. It felt smaller than it should have. Lorraine was already seated, cream blazer, back straight, Colin beside her. Too casual, like this was routine business. Jonathan Pike had a binder open in front of him. Tabs, labels, order. Richard slid the packet toward me. This agreement transfers all estate interest in Mercer and Hale, the Westfield residence, and related accounts. Pike spoke evenly. In exchange, my client withdraws the will contest and dismisses the custody petition with prejudice. No future claims. Lorraine uncapped her pen. Before signatures, Richard said calmly, we need confirmation on the record. Pike nodded. Schedule B outlines outstanding liabilities. They total in excess of $1 million. He turned the binder toward Lorraine. Vendor advances $320,000. Payroll tax lion $118,000. Malpractice settlement executed and unpaid $275,000. Remaining lease obligation $342,000. Line of credit personally guaranteed $480,000. The numbers sat there between us. I've reviewed it, Lorraine said without scanning the page. Pike cleared his throat. My advisory letter recommends delaying acceptance pending forensic audit. I'm aware, Lorraine replied. I signed the waiver. Richard looked at her directly. To be clear, you're accepting both assets and liabilities associated with the estate's business interest. I am, she said. Let's proceed. Colin shifted in his chair. We need to stabilize operations. Pike didn't look pleased, but he said nothing more. I picked up the pen. My fingers felt steady, which surprised me. I signed first. The sound of paper sliding was louder than it should have been. Lorraine signed next. Quick. Certain. Pike closed the binder. Effective immediately. Lorraine finally met my eyes. You're relinquishing a firm with annual billings exceeding $1 million, she said. That's not a small thing. Gross revenue, I answered quietly. Not net. Colin frowned. Lorraine didn't. As we stood, Pike added one last sentence for the record. All parties acknowledge informed consent. Lorraine nodded once. In the hallway, she paused. You'll understand legacy one day, she said. I didn't argue. I simply walked away. 3 weeks later, the first certified letter arrived at Mercer and Hale addressed to Lorraine Mercer. I didn't go looking for news. It found me anyway. Denise texted first, certified mail. IRS. I was at the kitchen table when I read it. Isla's cereal bowl still in front of her. Milk ringed in the bottom. How bad I typed, she called instead. Payroll tax lien, Denise said quietly. $118,000. They've attached penalties. I pressed my fingers into the edge of the table. Was Lorraine there? She signed for it, opened it herself, and she didn't say much. Just asked Thomas whether it could be negotiated. Negotiated, like it was a catering invoice. After I hung up, I stood at the sink longer than I needed to. The water ran cold over my hands. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't celebrating. I just felt steadier. 2 days later, Richard called. The plaintiff in the malpractice case filed a motion to enforce the settlement. He said, $275,000. I replied before he could. Yes, he said. Payment was due 60 days after execution. That deadline has passed, and the execution was before Andrew died. Yes. I exhaled slowly. So now it's the firm's obligation, and the firm is hers, Richard said. That afternoon, Colin called. He didn't bother with hello. You knew, he said. About what, the personal guarantee? $480,000. The bank called me. You signed a modification package, I said. It wasn't hidden. They said it was necessary to maintain payroll. It was, I answered. That doesn't make it harmless. There was breathing on the other end. You could have told me how bad it was. He said. I told both of you to audit before signing. That's not the same as saying we'd drown. No, I said quietly. It's not. He went silent. Later that week, Jonathan Pike contacted Richard again. The landlord is enforcing the remaining lease term. Pike said, $342,000 unless a personal guarantee is reaffirmed. And Richard asked, She executed it. Of course she did. By Friday, Denise reported vendor finance companies had begun calling directly. $320,000 in advances were due within 30 days. One threatened suit. That night, after Isla was asleep, Lorraine called me. What did you do? She asked. I transferred what you demanded. I said, You knew these liabilities were imminent. They were documented. You let me walk into this. I paused before answering. You insisted on control. I said, Control includes risk. Her breathing sharpened. This isn't finished, she said. No, I agreed. It isn't. A week later, Colin filed suit against his own mother. I didn't hear it through gossip first. Thomas Hale called me. Colin retained separate counsel. He said quietly, He filed this morning. Filed what a complaint against Lorraine, alleging misrepresentation and undue pressure regarding the personal guarantee. I sat down slowly. On what basis he claims he signed under time pressure to prevent payroll default. Says material liabilities weren't fully explained. They were in the modification packet. I said, Yes, Thomas replied, but whether he understood them is another matter. An hour later, the public docket confirmed it. Colin Mercer versus Lorraine Mercer. I called Richard. He's arguing coercion, Richard said. Specifically that Lorraine insisted the guarantee was procedural and temporary. And was it? I asked. It was permanent, he said evenly. That afternoon, Colin called me himself. She said it was standard. He began. No greeting. Standard doesn't mean safe. I replied. The bank officer kept looking at her. Not me. And you still signed. I thought if I didn't, the firm would collapse immediately. I didn't answer right away. She told me legacy required sacrifice. He added, I didn't realize I was the sacrifice. That was new. She's selling Bloomfield, he continued, to cover $118,000 in tax liens and the first malpractice installment. And the rest I asked. Still do. Plus the vendor advances. There was a pause. You're not surprised. He said. I'm not. I answered. Will you testify I won't lie? I said. And I won't speculate. He was quiet for a long moment. She told me you manipulated this. I transferred what she demanded. That's not the same. No, I said. It isn't. Word traveled quickly. Not through tabloids. Through school parents, charity boards, quiet conversations at pickup lines. That evening, Lorraine called. You encouraged him. She said, I didn't draft his complaint. He's my son. And Isla is my responsibility. She exhaled sharply. You're watching everything unravel. I'm watching consequences. I replied. You could still intervene. How publicly affirm the firm's stability? I almost smiled. You wanted sole control. I said, control includes accountability. 2 days later, a process server knocked on my door. This time, it wasn't about money. Lorraine was seeking to reopen custody on grounds of alleged instability. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly like disinfectant and old paper. I'd been here before, but this felt different. Richard adjusted his tie beside me. She's arguing changed circumstances, he said quietly. Financial instability affecting the child's environment. I almost laughed. She created the instability. That won't matter unless we show documentation. Across the hall, Lorraine stood with Jonathan Pike. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just contained. Colin wasn't with her. When we were called in, Lorraine didn't look at me. The judge flipped through the file. Mrs. Mercer, you're seeking to reopen custody despite a signed dismissal with prejudice? Lorraine lifted her chin. I signed under emotional distress. Richard spoke calmly. The waiver includes explicit acknowledgement that Mrs. Mercer proceeded against counsel's advice, Jonathan Pike added. My advisory letter recommending a full audit is part of the record. The judge looked at Lorraine. Did you sign voluntarily? Lorraine hesitated, just for a second. Yes, she said. Were you represented by competent counsel? Yes. Were the liabilities disclosed prior to transfer? Pike nodded. They were summarized in estate filings. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Mercer, has there been any change in the child's living situation? No, I said. Isla is stable. She attends the same school. She's in counseling. She sleeps through the night again. Lorraine's jaw tightened. She deserves continuity. Lorraine said. The Mercer name carries responsibility. The Mercer name, the judge replied, does not override signed agreements. Silence. The judge closed the folder. Motion denied. Dismissal stands. That was it. No dramatic gavel. No raised voices. Just done. Outside the courtroom, Lorraine stepped in front of me. You could have fixed this. She said, I didn't break it. I answered, you knew the firm was collapsing. You insisted on ownership. You let me drown. I looked at her for a long moment. You pushed me out, I said quietly. You told me I was the variable. Her face flickered. Anger, pride, something else. You'll regret isolating Isla from her family. I didn't isolate her, I replied. You made it transactional. Jonathan Pike touched Lorraine's arm. We should go. She didn't move at first. Then she stepped aside. Richard leaned toward me. That's likely the end of the custody issue. Likely, I repeated. As we walked down the steps, Isla squeezed my hand. Is Grandma mad? She asked. She's upset. I said, did we win? I paused. We kept our promise, I told her. She seemed satisfied with that. But later that night, when the house was quiet, my phone lit up again. Lorraine, I let it ring once. Then I answered. I answered on the second ring. Neither of us spoke at first. I could hear her breathing. Slow. Controlled. You knew, Lorraine said finally. I knew the numbers. I replied. You knew the malpractice settlement was due. The tax line. The lease exposure? Her voice wavered just slightly. You let me assume control anyway. You insisted on control, I said. I didn't conceal anything. Silence. I sold Bloomfield, she continued. It covered the $118,000 in payroll taxes and part of the settlement. There's still more due. I heard. I said. You're not surprised. No. Another pause. Longer this time. Colin filed motions to freeze my personal assets. She said, he claims I pressured him into signing. He made his own signature. I answered quietly. You say that like it absolves you. It doesn't. I said, it clarifies responsibility. Her breath caught, and for a moment she sounded older than she ever had. I thought preserving Mercer and Hale honored Andrew. She said, I thought maintaining the firm kept his name intact. His name was never in danger. I said, only the business was. That business mattered. So did his daughter. She didn't argue that. I miscalculated, she said at last. Not apology. Just admission. Yes, I said. After we hung up, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The life insurance confirmation was still in my inbox. $1,400,000. Not wealth. Not triumph. Just security. The next morning, Isla and I drove to the cemetery. The grass had been freshly cut. I stood in front of Andrew's headstone and told him what had happened. She wanted the firm. I said, I kept stability. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steadier. If I could say one thing to anyone who finds themselves in a room where power and grief mix together, it would be this: read what you sign. Ask questions. Don't surrender peace for prestige. Legacy sounds noble. It can also be expensive. I wasn't flawless. I hesitated. I almost reacted from anger instead of strategy. I let Lorraine speak to me in ways I shouldn't have tolerated, but I learned something about the difference between control and protection. Isla slipped her hand into mine. Are we okay? She asked. We're stable, I said. That was enough. If you ever face a choice between keeping a name and keeping your peace, look carefully at what each one actually costs. I chose differently, and I can live with that.